Why is Sony shuttering the PlayStation Store?
And what kind of report card did the NBN get from the consumer watchdog? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as always, by Alex Kidman, a man who is so determined not to be outdone by my miracle weight loss that he's gone back to running 5K. Alex, how's the dad bod looking after day one?
Look, I'd like to say that after day one, I'm totally pumped and ripped, but the reality is that, well, I'm more kind of torn in the Natalie Imbruglia sense.
It's a long and painful road, but you will get there. You will get there. Speaking of dad bods, we're joined once again by a longtime friend of the show and ZDNet Australia editor Chris Duckett, who's just returned to work after paternity leave. Chris, welcome to the club. How are your dad jokes shaping up?
It's nice to put 2 decades of practice finally into, practical use.
Yeah.
But I got to wait a while to get a response from the young one. So I've got to perfect my delivery, no doubt.
Yeah, you can never start too soon. Never start too soon.
Absolutely. Look, honestly, right now might be the best response you ever get.
Fair, I would say. Absolutely.
So speaking of responses, it's been a big week in broadband as the ACCC responds to the NBN and gives it a grade, but also it's a big week for gamers, with Sony confirming that it's going to kill off the PlayStation Store for the PS3, PS Vita, and for PSP owners. So Alex caught up earlier with Matt Sainsbury from Digitally Downloaded to find out what it's all about.
Okay, so this week, Sony confirmed something that had been rumoured for a while, that it was going to close down the PlayStation Store, but before people hit the streets and start tipping cars over, it's only closing down the bits that relate to the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation Portable, and the PlayStation Vita. And I'm joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Matt Sainsbury from Digitally Downloaded. Matt, why are Sony doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? They haven't really given a reason as such in their little excuse that they put out there. But, I mean, you can assume that it's because these are legacy equipment. There's probably not that many people still buying games on them. And they want to free up space on the servers or something like that. I'm sure that's the excuse they'd give you if you asked them. But they haven't really given a reason. They've just said that they're going to do this, and we all just have to lump it and live with it.
Okay, so slight devil's advocate question. If very few people are buying games on these services, does it matter?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, if you think about legacy games, there's always going to be, at some stage, somebody discovers a game that they've never really heard of before, and they want to check it out, There was a lot of games released, especially on the PlayStation 3, and there are still people that do discover them as they play, as people tell them about them. There's an awful lot of really obscure games on the PlayStation Network, and I think that keeping it there as a resource for people that wanted to go and check these games out later on was probably a thing that I would have liked to have seen Sony do. If for no other reason, then it preserves all these games, because PlayStation 3 is still relatively new, and it's still something I think that there is still a percentage of people that still use PlayStation. I know quite a few people who still use PlayStation 3s as their main console. They haven't upgraded yet. We could call them laggards or whatever, but there is still people out there that have an interest in PlayStation. And there's still a big community for the PlayStation Vita too. In fact, there was a story I saw. There was a PlayStation Vita developer who was still releasing games digitally on the PlayStation Vita. They only found out about that today with the announcement from Sony. So that was good communication to the development community from Sony. But yeah, so there is still a market out there. There are still people that want to use these platforms.
Yeah, I've got to admit, it's funny that the PlayStation 3 should probably qualify as retro now that we're into the PlayStation 5 era, but I struggle to think of it that way myself. But I mean, looking at it, it's 15 years old, and I suppose, again, devil's advocate question, It's 15 years old. The store has been there for 15 years. How long is long enough in the context of that availability?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on how you look at video games. Do you see them as kind of cultural artifacts, as kind of works of art? If so, then I mean, we're preserving paintings that are 500 years old. There is the argument there that as long as these things have cultural value, which is forever effectively, that there should be some way to be able to access and play them. If you see them as a pure product thing, then I guess Sony would probably be justified in it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the audience isn't quite there anymore. They're not actively supporting these consoles in terms of updates and things. So it becomes harder to maintain them if people want to send them in to get them repaired or whatever. And I guess the other argument you could make is that Sony wants to get those laggards off these kind of legacy consoles buying shiny new PlayStation 5s. A really good way to say, hey, you should probably do that is to cut the store out. So there is certainly commercial reasons that Sony could probably be justified in doing what it's doing. But as a guy that likes to think that video games are artworks and have cultural value, I think that there was a stronger argument that they should have kept these servers going.
Oh, look, I totally agree with you, and I think the commercial argument would have a lot more legs if there were actual PlayStation 5s people could buy.
Yes, there's
but
that too.
I'm sure that's not a problem that Sony wants to have. Sony's also obviously caught a lot of flack and doesn't look all that good compared to Microsoft in all of this, because Microsoft put more of a push towards backwards compatibility, albeit generally really only towards the Xbox 360. The poor old OG Xbox got, like 8, 10 titles or something once, and that was it.
Yeah. I mean,
Nintendo.
I was just going to say. I mean, there is certainly, you can say that Microsoft has done a better job with preserving these games, but it's been very selective about what it's done. Not just with the original Xbox, but also the Xbox 360. There are a lot of games that it hasn't touched. There are a lot of games from third-party developers which are not available on the Xbox via that backwards compatibility. So I think in general, the industry does have an issue with archiving games. And I always think back to the story that I think it's about 80 or 90% of films that were made in the first 3 or 4 decades of cinema have all been lost because they did such a poor job with archiving these things and preserving them. And that's a lot of culture to lose. And I feel like the games industry is, if anything, it's even a more kind of exaggerated version of that. And I think we're going to lose much more than 80 or 90% of the video games from the first couple of decades of this little industry 100 years down the track.
Yeah, look, I fear you're right, although I do wonder. I mean, you brought up the third-party devs there. Sony obviously owns a lot of the games which are no longer going to be available because it owns a whole bunch of studios or just owns the code outright. But there's so many of those little quirky, independent, especially digital-only games out there where the ownership in 5 to 10 years' time, if the studios collapse, could be murky. One developer might have the code and might have a house fire. It could all go pretty easily, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, let's take one of the really old consoles as a good example, the Game Boy, right? The Game Boy, Nintendo's done a terrible job of archiving its own games as well in its old systems. They did do a decent push with the Game Boy to get the old GB games on the Nintendo 3DS via Virtual Console, right? And even then, it was a fraction of a percent of the total games that were created. And the reason being, a lot of those developers are no longer there. A lot of the publishers are no longer there. The rights to these games are split between so many different parties, and it's very hard to recover those games from a commercial perspective once they've been lost in that way. So I think that's what's going to happen with the PlayStation 3, Vita, PSP as well.
So where does that leave those games? Because the other way that these go, not so much for the PlayStation 3 yet, as I'm aware, but certainly for the PlayStation Portable and for tons of other properly retro systems, as it were, those kind of funky little Chinese-made handhelds, your Anbinix and the type.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of those, as you know. And I've kind of, over this pandemic, it's become something of a hobby to start buying those things up and collecting them and seeing how they can kind of mess with emulation and all that kind of stuff. And there is certainly a lot that those consoles are really doing to kind of preserve this stuff because, sure, it's kind of less than legal in a lot of cases, or in all cases, I guess, when it comes to the ROM side of things. The hardware itself is totally legal, but the ROMs being what they are, it's illegal to have those. But yeah, that's kind of the only way that a lot of these games are even accessible now. So if you're going to make a kind of moral argument about these things, is it right to preserve them, even if it is, stepping on IP laws or whatever it is? It's a complex conversation, and I think this industry really needs to deal with that. I think the film industry has done a better job of it since they've realized that they need to preserve these things. The television industry is doing a better job of at least archiving this stuff. But the games industry is really coming up to a wall very quickly, where we're going to lose some really great stuff.
So what we need is kind of a criterion for games, someone who's willing to take that financial position to say, here's a bunch of obscurities, buy them.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I guess what I'd like to see is Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo come together and dedicate some resources to preserving this stuff, at least making sure that the files are kept and everything's there, that if there is an opportunity to later bring it up again, they can. I mean, I'm sure you know of the amazing story of Final Fantasy VIII, which was almost lost completely to us. One of the most, lauded games in one of the most lauded franchises of all time. Square Enix managed to lose the source code to it, and it took a very talented developer to kind of work backwards from a commercial copy to bring it to our modern systems. And I don't want to see that happen with a lot of games that, especially on the PlayStation 3, may just disappear off hard drives from these developers.
See, I'm still hurting from the fact that Taito lost the Bubble Bobble source code.
I never knew that story. They did, did they? They had to rebuild it, did they?
The original code is gone. Has been long gone, and as many people would know, that's my favourite game of all time. But speaking of favourite games, so people have got, I think it's till the 2nd of July for the PS3 and what's left of the PSP, because they've removed a lot of its sale stuff already.
Yeah, they have.
And then the 27th of August for the PlayStation Vita. Now, you're a man who covers the Japanese gaming scene a lot more than I do, and certainly observationally, I've noticed the PlayStation Vita especially was massive in Japan in the way it wasn't here. What kind of hidden gems, what things do you think people should be trying to buy before those end dates, before they're not able to legally acquire them?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the PlayStation Vita, there's an awful lot of games that Sony published that are all very good and very much worth looking into. The one I always recommend it's called Orishika, which is a Japanese RPG with a very kind of Okami style, kind of ukiyo-e Japanese aesthetic. It's a very good game. They just kind of dropped it out there, and it died very quickly, but it is actually very high quality. There's also another one called Soul Sacrifice, which the sequel didn't even get a physical release. The original did, but good luck finding physical games now. But the sequel, which was Delta, I think, Soul Sacrifice Delta, can't remember the subtitle of it. But anyway, those are kind of Monster Hunter style games with a very dark gothic edge to them, and they're also very good. Very much worth checking out. Another Monster Hunter-like is called Freedom Fighter, and it was another really, really good Monster Hunter-like that Sony published on the Vita. So there's those kind of really chunky JRPGs. The Vita had a lot of those. On the PlayStation 3, again, there's a lot of good stuff from Sony, which we may lose. Tokyo Jungle is a really good one. It was a roguelike where you played as an animal and all the humans had left, and kind of Tokyo had been overtaken by plants and stuff again. And you need to go hunting for food and finding a way to survive. It was really, really neat. It's become a bit of a cult classic now. And then there was a couple of small ones. The one I always remember is called Rain. And it's this kind of, how can I describe it? If you've seen The City of Lost Children, the film, it's got this really kind of French Euro aesthetic, and it's a ghost story, and it's really hard to explain in a short space of time on a podcast, but I highly recommend you go and check it out. It's called Rain, just RAIN, on the PlayStation 3. So those would be the ones that I kind of recommend most, but it's kind of really scratching the surface on what you can get.
Yeah, there's even, and I hadn't really thought about this till I started digging through it, there's even an older retro angle that we're losing as well, because the PlayStation 3, of course, got PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 classics, I think they called them, digital ports of some games, in fact, which are insanely expensive if you wanted to try and track down physical copies. Suikoden 2 and God Hand and games like that.
Persona 3 and 4, the originals,
Yeah.
before they got the remakes and whatever. So if you're a fan of Persona 5, which a lot of people only discovered the series with Persona 5, you really should check out 3 and 4. You can grab those on the PlayStation 3 as PS2 classics. There was another one that I personally love. It's called Kessen by Koei Tecmo, and it's kind of a strategy game based in the same period as the Samurai Warriors series, and it's really good because Koei knows their historical simulations. So yeah, that was another one that I spent a lot of time playing on the PS2 on the PS3. So yeah, we lose all of that as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a pity to see it go, I suppose.
I think Sony's kind of a pioneer there too, because Nintendo has finished some services. The DSiWare, I think, has been finished. I think the Wii U even got wound up because
pretty much, yeah,
that console just died. But I think Sony, because the PlayStation 3 in particular was such a well-respected, loved console, and it was really the first one where digital games became a default. Before that, everything was just physical, or the digital downloads were like this tiny edition, and you still went to the shops to buy pretty much anything that was major. The PS3 was the first one to kind of get all those AAA games and all the big budget ones as on that console as a digital download. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of pioneering the impact that we'll see from switching the servers off.
Okay, well, thanks so much for your time, Matt. Now, as is traditional on this show, now it's your chance to answer 3 quick-fire questions.
Oh, no.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And critically, which children's cartoon character is the best of all time?
Okay, so you can find me on digitallydownloaded.net. Do not go to .com. It takes you somewhere weird, I think. I did last time I tried. .net only. You can find me on social media. Probably best to grab me on Twitter if you can put up with my opinions. It's at Matt Sainsby. So MattsAinsB. And cartoon character. Can I say Hatsune Miku?
No.
Oh, damn.
I mean, I knew you were going to say that, but no.
That's my thing. Hatsune Miku's my thing. My favourite cartoon character, I know. I'm going to go with Robin Hood, Fox. Fox from Robin Hood, as in the Disney film. When Disney was great. Yeah, that one. That was my childhood, that Fox.
An excellent choice. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
So, Chris, it's that time of year again where we get the ACCC's Measuring Broadband Australia report. So basically a report card for the NBN. Now, you've got the drama of report cards to look forward to. End of term reports have been a bit mixed in my household, a little bit of controversy. But is it a good or bad report card for the NBN? Do we need to send it to its room without any dinner?
Well, if you got a report card every term, that's this is a quarterly sort of thing. And this is pretty much in line with the rest of them. So if you think the NBN's failed, it's still failing. If you think it's got a pass, it's still passing. The one new thing they put here was they actually spelled out for the first time the fixed wireless speeds. And in that area, I would say it's very, very close to getting an F, in the sense that on this best effort service they have, which is supposedly you can get up to 50 down and somewhere in the order of double digits up, particularly the upload speed. This thing was getting only 6 when it was clear in the middle of the night, and when it was busy, it was down to 4 megabits per second. And if you're doing any sort of upload, that's the sort of upload that's only good purely for consumption. If you're trying to back up, if you're trying to put photos, whatever, that thing is going to get hosed very, very quickly. So for people in regional Australia that have been complaining for a long time, this is really the first time we've got a set of numbers where we can point to and go, oh my goodness, this is actually quite terrible.
Do you get the impression they're actually going to do anything about it, or has fixed wireless always been you gets what you get and you don't complain?
Well, this is one of the things that goes back to the original makeup of the NBN when Labor kicked it off. There was always going to be fixed wireless. There was always going to be satellite, and that 7% of the footprint were always going to be behind everybody else. And so while most people argue about, well, I want full fiber and whatever, you got to think about people in regional Australia who can't even get double digits up. And there's no point. If you were a business, you can't sit there and make this massive, great big bandwidth hogging thing and then think it's universal to Australia when there's 7% just sitting there chugging away, maybe getting 50 if they're lucky. They're more likely to sit around 25 down. And if you want them to upload anything, well, maybe they can do it overnight because they're not going to do much when everyone else is on the tower, that's for sure.
We know they've been kind of experimenting and talking about 5G, and the existing fixed wireless is kind of a weird mix of 3G and 4G and other technologies. But is there a reason, if their uploads especially are so bad, that they can't just kind of rent a bit of capacity from your Telstra's, Optus's and Vodafones?
Well, that would probably be the way that the users would get around it, I would suggest. If you can get fixed wireless, there's a better than average charger in a mobile footprint, and you're probably going to get better service if you can find a cheap, reliable mobile connection from one of the usual suspects. Would NBN do it? Well, I mean, they go into this is the reason why NBN plays around in spectrum auctions. So they're managing their own spectrum. It's this old school profile of we really need to boost download and we can just sort of forget about uploads. People are now got proper reasons, with streaming and all this sort of stuff to actually want to get speeds that are more symmetrical. If they could snap their fingers and roll out 5G, I'm sure they would, because that would probably help it. It would definitely use the spectrum better. But as usual with NBN, you just can't update a footprint like this just by clicking your fingers. So unfortunately, it's going to be yet another long, torturous process of people sitting around, and then when the upgrades do come, who knows if they'll be fit for purpose at that point.
Am I right in thinking one of the satellite providers, maybe it was Elon Musk's mob, recently announced pricing for Australia, and then NBN changed its satellite pricing from a bit of competition? Am I remembering that correctly?
So Elon has put out the pricing and the expression if you want to get it in Australia, and NBN dropped the pricing on their business satellite plans.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is the satellites that NBN put up, once again, these are the original Labor ones. They've only got a life in them of I think it's about another decade or 15 years, which in satellite terms isn't that long. There's a number of problems that they really need to fix with these satellites. For instance, being able to handle voice so that you don't need Telstra copper connections in the bush anymore. That would be handy. And also, the satellites and that sort of stuff, they're running on technologies that were fine when they were designed, which was a decade ago now. It's not outside the realm of possibility that NBN could turn around to Elon and say, we'd like to rent some Starlink from you. And NBN has been throwing around scenarios for a couple of years now on what to do about these satellites, because you do need a long run up on these things to get them launched and in the air properly. So that's something that they could do. I don't actually think that NBN's going to be against renting from someone if they have a superior service and it doesn't cost them too much.
Well, they already, rent pits and pipes and so on from Telstra. What would the difference be with renting a bit of 4G from 4G or 5G from them, a bit of Starlink, which we did cover off in a previous episode, from Elon? It might even be more cost efficient.
It could be. It could very well be. For the people out in the bush, cross fingers that someone's doing the paperwork on this. But as with most things in NBN, we have to sort of wait and see until it's going, because, we could pontificate about all sorts of alternatives and then find out they're going with 6 of them or none.
So apart from fixed wireless, how did the report card look?
So much the same as always. So thanks to ACCC loving to over-provision and not knowing how network stacks work, once you take out badly performing...
Settle in, people. Yeah, this is his big rant. Here it comes.
You can go back to the previous episodes for this. But, it does mean that once you take out the underperforming fiber to the node premises, then you get these stats that come back and say, for instance, like Optus, TPG, Telstra, they all perform over 100%. Right?
Yeah.
So
they're giving 110%, people.
And we've already said, when this over-provisioning turned on, Telstra was telling customers it was a free speed boost. It was nothing. It was the regulator telling them that NBN was turning stuff up. So the takeaway kind of, I think, from this report is that basically if you're with Optus, Telstra, TPG, you're fine. Whatever you're getting is probably what you're going to get. And I put that as I'm lugging iiNet in with the TPG because this report still breaks out TPG and iiNet and Vodafone instead of putting them together. The sponsor of this podcast actually kind of just, sort of like coming around the 200-meter turn and just drop back a little bit, but, they're not terrible either. And as for the rest, it's basically, look, it's a crapshoot, and that's why they're cheap, basically. So it might be good sometimes. It might not be. And then, of course, on the other test, they decided that they would try and stream 4 Netflix streams at once on a 50 megabit plan for reasons best known to them, honestly.
I thought they said something like that you could do 4 HD streams on 12 megabits per second or something crazy like that. Did I imagine that?
Look, it's entirely theoretical, and given that there are no other devices on your network that are doing anything other than streaming Netflix, it's an entirely ridiculous thing that they do, but hey, giving 10% extra is also ridiculous. So why not step further into Wonderland and go meet the Cheshire Cat and all that? So, yeah, look, they've got some numbers here, but look, you got to remember, this is the report that the ACCC got in hot water about because they, using these Sam Knows white boxes, these were the ones where they came up with the VidConf report last year and said, I think it was Cisco and somebody else. Oh, well, they're hosting this infrastructure overseas. So that's why the speeds are slow. And then, those vendors went, no, sorry. And then they basically had to retract that whole report. So, look, anything beyond base measurements that they've got here, which have been practically in the same sort of realm now for, a year or two, I would take with a grain of salt. But I mean, because basically, funnily enough, it turns out if you've got a good base connection to your home, you're going to be able to get good Netflix. And if you've got a poor connection, not going to be able to stream as much Netflix.
I still have a much larger grain of salt, I think, than most with this contention of 4 HD streams on 12 meg, just looking at Netflix's own speeds and suggested speeds, because they state, and I warn you, there's a bit of an incoming rant coming, gentlemen, but Netflix says you can run on as little as half a meg. That's the minimum spec. So theoretically, that 12 meg thing, 24 simultaneous Netflix streams. I mean, that's just so much Netflix that your head's going to explode. But, of course, that doesn't actually happen. When it comes to HD, though, they actually state that to watch Netflix, you've got to have an HD plan, obviously. You've got to set your video quality to auto, so it does that adaptive streaming thing, or high, and only then it will play in HD if you have a connection speed of 5 megabits per second or faster. That says to me 2 is achievable, 2.5, half an HD, so it's half the screen or something, I don't know, is achievable. But 4, something doesn't add up.
Look, I too like to put numbers into the calculator to come up with ideas when I write reports. It's just, yeah. Look, I just looked at that. I'm like, that really doesn't translate into the real world at all. It's like they're doing it from a white box that's sitting behind everything else on the network. So it's not going to get touched by much. Like typically they're doing these tests in the dead of night too, when the connection's underutilized for that reason, right? That someone's Windows update doesn't suddenly kick into gear halfway through a show or something. So yeah, look, someone's sitting there going, I can get by on 12 megabits or 25. You probably can't unless you're the one person using it.
Well, this was the other thing I was going to say. 12 megabits, because I do a monthly column where I look at the kind of prices and so on of broadband plans and advice stuff for Finder. They pay me for that. But thank you very much, Finder.
As they should.
As they should, totally. But the point there is 12 megabit plans are actually few and far between. There just aren't that many of them left. It's not actually in NBN's best interest. They want to push the higher speed plans and make more money out of people. That whole average revenue per user numbers game comes into play there. So it's actually kind of hard to get a 12 meg plan. But even if you're on 25 meg, and this is much more anecdotal, my mother-in-law is on a 25 meg fiber to the node plan. She doesn't quite get the full 25 down, but anecdotally, yes, she can run Netflix on it, but as soon as somebody else in the house, if she has visitors, tries to, start a YouTube video, it's buffering City.
Yeah, and the 12 megabits is a weird spot, right? Because NBN, this is meant to be the ADSL replacement. As you said, NBN doesn't like it because it reduces the revenue. Telcos don't like it because there's no money in it. And yet the ACCC is doing a whole bunch of they're doing an inquiry into the entry level pricing, which revolves around the 12 megabit plan. They still think 12 by 1 is usable. You've got the telco saying just make it 25 or just make NBN structure 25 in a way that we can use it instead. And yet this 12 is still out there somewhere. And yeah, like if you go to any of the major providers, you're not going to find it on the site. You'll have to bury around to find it. Like it's just not there. And you're going to end up having to have something like ACCC Tel will end up being the only people offering a 12 by 1 plan.
With a big Sim Smash on the logo.
Oh, we've jacked up speeds by 10% because we don't understand the networking. Yeah. Good on you, Sim Smash.
So speaking of smashed, the HFC rollout got a little smashed thanks to COVID and shortages of networking gear. What's the update there? When do they think it's going to get back up and running?
End of May. So there's a backlog of premises that were moving during the pause. So it's about, top of my head, I think it's about 30,000. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Of people that they've got to get to. So apparently NBN's been getting their supplies through March, and now they're going to turn around and get through that backlog. And then by the end of May, they've said that they'll be in a position to start accepting new orders. And that should be the end of the most recent HFC pause. But, this is global supply chain problems. There's a chipset shortage everywhere in the world, and there's absolutely nothing to say that it won't come back like the day after, because everyone's sitting here at the moment going, we can't get chipsets. And why would you make HFC modem chipsets if you could make more money selling GPUs to, buttcoin bros, right?
So basically, the HFC rollout pause is the fault of Sony producing too many PlayStation 5s.
Well, yeah, that's the one as well. There is a certain publication I see every weekend. This is international, by the way, but it's like PlayStation 5s are on sale here. But by the time I get to them in the Australian morning, it says update sold out. So yeah. So it's like like this thing is affecting everyone, and really, this is something that's just out of these people's controls. It's out of Sony's control. There's only so much stuff TSMC can produce. So, yeah, we have to sit and wait and cop it.
So what you're saying is we should actually be promoting an Australian chip fab industry.
My goodness. We're recording this on a day when we get $1 billion to make missiles, so our own missiles, because apparently we've got to be sovereign in the missile space. But, why not? It is the time for it.
We've got a lot of sand.
Exactly. We've got the market cornered for freaking zircon or whatever it is. So, yeah, I mean, look, why not? Why not? I'm not going to be sensible about this because the people in charge aren't either.
How hard could it be?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. How hard could it be to set up a government-owned wholesaler? No problem at all. People will love us for it.
Can't see what could go wrong.
I'm seeing no drawbacks. Sign me up.
Well, that static sound means that it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chris for joining us for the show this week.
Pleasure to be back, gents.
And thanks, of course, to Matt for the earlier segment. And Chris, as is our usual habit that you're long aware of, now's the time for you to answer 3 quick questions. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media? And because it's time for a brand new question, and because I like contentious question, what's the best sci-fi TV series of all time?
Ooh, there's a podcast right there.
Oh, gee, yeah, I didn't realize you were commissioning a 27-part series just with that question.
You have a time limit, sir. You're wasting your time.
Okay, fine. Only because I religiously watched it and then regretted the last couple of seasons, I'd probably say any of the forms of Battlestar Galactica, probably. And also, it's filmed in Vancouver, and I live there, so you could walk around and go, "Oh my god, they were using the local uni as Caprica. That's they did a good job, I guess." And you can find me at ZDNet and at the socials. Look, my name's pretty unique. Type it into Google, you'll find me. And then you too might regret the last couple of seasons.
Are you including like classic 70s Battlestar in that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Good. Oh good. I like completeness.
Yeah, you've got to. I mean, if you haven't seen the classic Lawn Green death scene, I mean, what are you doing with yourself?
Exactly. And as always, you can catch us online at verticalhold.au on Twitter, verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan up to NBN 100. Don't go for NBN 12. I think we've covered that. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to tell your friends about us, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
So you've asked me this question before too.
Yeah,
don't worry.
That's right. He's got that covered.
All right.
I have
good.
a plan.
Good.
I'm the improv side of the equation.
I can improv when my life depends on it. Sometimes.
Mental note: threaten Adam's life more.
And don't give him any warning that improv is involved.
And as always, thanks for living. Shit, thanks for living. Where did that come from?
We don't discriminate against our zombie listeners.
Thanks for living the Vertical Hold life. What even is that?
It's been a long day.